We live in a world saturated with noise. External noise, yes, but even more dangerously, internal noise. Confusion, anxiety, distraction, desire pulling in all directions. And most people, whether religious or not, are trying to find some form of order in the middle of that chaos. What they often don't realize is that without aligning yourself to something higher, something eternal, you're simply rearranging the disorder, not transcending it. That's where putting God first changes everything. Not as an abstract idea or a spiritual cliché, but as a lived reality. When you align yourself with God, you are choosing to bring divine order into your human disorder. It's like tuning an instrument. If the strings are even slightly off, the sound is wrong. No matter how good the musician is, the music will be off key. And the same is true for us. You can have ambition, intelligence, even a good heart. But if your life isn't tuned to the frequency of God, the song of your life will sound dissonant, fragmented, anxious, unstable. But when you put Him first, truly first, not just in word but in action, you begin to harmonize with something beyond yourself, and in that harmony, peace begins to grow. Psychologically speaking, human beings crave meaning. And meaning isn't found in personal success alone. It's found in alignment. We don't just want to know that we're moving, we want to know we're moving in the right direction. But right direction only exists in reference to something greater than the self. That's what the modern world often misses. We talk about authenticity and following your truth. But unless your truth is grounded in the truth, capital T truth, then you're just chasing shadows. Putting God first grounds you in objective reality. It tells your soul there is a center to this spinning world, and I'm choosing to build my life around that center. Philosophers from every tradition have understood this principle. Order emerges when we submit to something higher. In the Christian tradition, God is not only the creator, He is also logos. That Greek word means logic, reason, the underlying structure of reality itself. When John writes, "In the beginning was the Word," he's saying in the beginning was the structure, the design, the organizing principle. And that principle is God. So when we say, put God first, we're not just making a religious statement, we're making a claim about how to live sanely in an insane world. Most people put themselves first, their wants, their feelings, their problems, and then they wonder why their life feels unstable. Because the self was never designed to carry the weight of ultimate meaning. We're not strong enough for that. But when you put God first, something shifts. The internal clutter starts to clear, your decisions have direction, your emotions stop ruling over you, and your identity is no longer something you have to invent. It becomes something you receive. This is why the morning matters. The first hour of your day is not just about time, it's about alignment. The early hours are when your soul is most open, most impressionable. If you begin your day with God, you are essentially saying, before the world speaks, before my fears speak, before my plans speak, I choose to hear from you. That one decision sets a tone, it puts your life in tune, and in that tuning, divine order begins to flow. So the question is simple: what are you aligning yourself to? Because the quality of your life, the peace of your soul, and the clarity of your path all depend on the answer. And here's the truth to walk away with. When you put God at the center, everything else finds its rightful place. There's a principle that runs like a golden thread through both scripture and human experience: what you prioritize, you multiply. It's not just a religious formula, it's a psychological reality. And this principle becomes especially powerful when you understand the biblical idea of first. God never asks for leftovers, He asks for the first fruits, the firstborn, the first moments of the day, not because He needs it, but because you do. Giving God the first isn't about meeting His needs, it's about shaping your soul. Now, let's look at this psychologically. Human beings are creatures of hierarchy. Whether consciously or not, we rank things: what matters most, what comes second, what we can afford to ignore. Your mind, your time, your energy, they all follow this internal hierarchy. If God is at the top, then everything else in your life begins to organize around that foundation. But if something else takes that spot, whether it's money, control, achievement, or even a relationship, then disorder starts to creep in. Not always in loud or obvious ways, but subtly, quietly. Priorities get confused, energy gets misdirected, And soon you find yourself multiplying stress, not peace. That's why the first matters so much. It's not about legalism, it's about structure. Think about the idea of first fruits in the Old Testament. The people didn't wait until harvest season was over and then decide what to give God. They gave him the first portion before they even knew how the rest of the crop would turn out. That act wasn't just financial, it was psychological. It trained the mind in trust. It conditioned the heart in surrender. It forced the soul to say, God, I don't know what's coming, but I'm giving you what I have now. You're my source. And here's what happens when you do that: God blesses the rest. Not because he's manipulated by gifts, but because the act of putting him first aligns your heart in such a way that you become capable of handling the blessing. You become the kind of person who can carry the weight of favor without being crushed by it. You stop worshipping the blessing and start honoring the one who gives it. That internal shift changes everything. There's also a neurological truth here. What you focus on first creates a filter for how you perceive everything else. Your first thought in the morning becomes a lens. If it's worry, then the whole day is colored by stress. If it's resentment, then every interaction feels like a battle. But if your first thought is worship, God, I trust you, I need you, I put you first, then that becomes your filter. It doesn't erase problems, but it reframes them. And framing, in psychology, is everything. Even financially, the principle of first applies. People often wonder why their money feels cursed, their work feels heavy. They're trying to multiply what hasn't been surrendered. And so they're operating from scarcity, not blessing. But when you give God the first, before the bills, before the pressure, before the fear, you're no longer a slave to lack. You're acting out of faith, and faith multiplies. The truth is, your life is always producing something. Energy, focus, emotion, time, it's all being sown and reaped. The only question is, what's it being multiplied toward? If God is first, then everything else begins to find flow. But if he's second or third or optional, then even the good things in your life start to decay. That's not punishment. It's just the consequence of misalignment. So here's what I'm urging you to consider, not just spiritually, but practically. Where does God rank in the real structure of your life? In your calendar, in your wallet, in your mind? Because the honest answer to that question will tell you exactly where your blessings are going, or not going. And this is the bottom line: whatever you give to God first, he blesses, and what he blesses multiplies far beyond what you could ever achieve on your own. There's something deeply powerful, almost countercultural, about beginning your day in prayer. And I don't mean reciting a few lines out of routine, or saying the same phrases out of guilt. I'm talking about consciously, intentionally placing your attention on God before anything else. It's a psychological declaration: I am not the center of the universe. My phone is not my God. My feelings are not my master. I submit to something higher. First, that kind of spiritual posture doesn't just impact your morning, it reshapes your entire approach to life. Most people wake up and immediately open a portal to chaos. Within seconds, they're scrolling through notifications, checking messages, diving into other people's opinions. News, demands, and drama. Without realizing it, they've surrendered the most sensitive, most formative moments of the day to noise. No reflection, no direction. Just consumption. And then they wonder why their thoughts feel scattered, why anxiety spikes before breakfast, why purpose feels elusive. It's not because God is silent. It's because the first voice they chose to hear wasn't his. You see, the morning is a sacred window. Neuroscience confirms that your mind is most impressionable in the early moments after waking. Your subconscious is still active. Your inner world is still soft, moldable. What you feed your mind in that state becomes a kind of blueprint for the rest of your day. So when you begin with prayer, real, honest, focused prayer, you are not just connecting with God spiritually. You're actually shaping your psychological framework to align with truth, with order, with peace. And here's the deeper insight: prayer is not just about speaking. It's about listening. When you pray in the morning, you're choosing to let God speak into your identity before the world does. That's critical, because the world will try to name you every single day, based on your performance, your status, your appearance, or your failures. But when you sit quietly before God, before anything else, and you say, Lord, I'm listening. What you receive in return is a kind of anchoring. He reminds you who you are, not as the world sees you, but as He created you. There's also an existential benefit to this practice. Morning prayer creates a ritual of grounding. In a world that's increasingly fragmented, where people are pulled in 1,000 directions, ritual matters. Not as empty habit, but as a deliberate act of centering. And centering, psychologically, is essential for mental health. It prevents the drift into confusion, distraction, and self-obsession. When you open your day with God, you're anchoring yourself to something that doesn't shift with the culture or collapse under pressure. You are stepping into a realm of permanence in a world of constant change. And I'll tell you this, your schedule will always fight against this habit. Everything will scream for your attention. The urgency of life never sleeps. That's why morning prayer is so powerful. It's an act of resistance. You're saying, no. Before I give myself to the demands of the world, I give myself to the one who holds the world. That simple decision, even if it's 10 minutes, can be the difference between a scattered day and a centered one. Between burnout and resilience, between striving and grace. It's not magic. It's not about getting everything you want. It's about becoming someone who sees clearly, walks wisely, and lives deeply anchored. And the foundation for that kind of life begins not with control, but with surrender. Not with planning, but with praying. So here's the invitation. Before the world rushes in, meet with God. And let that meeting define who you are, how you think, and what you carry into every moment that follows. It's one of the hardest truths to accept, especially for those of us who've been taught to hustle, strive, and fight for everything we have. God doesn't bless control. He blesses surrender. That's not weakness. That's not passivity. It's wisdom. Because control is an illusion, and the more tightly you cling to it, the more anxious, reactive, and exhausted you become. Control makes you feel powerful, but it disconnects you from true power. It makes you the center, and when you put yourself at the center, everything starts to fall apart from the inside out. You see, human beings have this deep psychological need for certainty. We want guarantees, we want predictable outcomes, and we often spiritualize that desire. We pray for blessings but secretly demand control. We want God to work on our timeline. We want His will, but only if it matches our agenda. So what ends up happening? We hold on, we grip, we plan obsessively, we micromanage, and in the process, we push God to the margins. But the structure of blessing doesn't work that way. God isn't manipulated. He's not a tool for self-actualization. He's not a life coach with a checklist. He's a king, a father, a lord, and He blesses what is surrendered, not what is clutched with fear. It's no coincidence that some of the most transformative moments in Scripture happen only after someone lets go. Abraham was promised a nation, but he had to be willing to lay Isaac down. Moses had to drop his fear and stand before Pharaoh. Jesus, in the Garden of Gethsemane, modeled the ultimate surrender. Not my will, but yours be done. That wasn't resignation. That was power through submission. Surrender psychologically is a reorientation of identity. When you surrender to God, you're admitting something vital. I am not the source of my life. I don't have all the answers. And I can't carry the weight of my future alone. That confession, far from being weak, is the beginning of actual strength. It realigns your mind with reality. Because no matter how intelligent, strategic, or hard-working you are, there are things in life you can't predict, can't fix, and can't force. And yet, this is where we often get stuck. We think surrender means giving up. It doesn't. It means opening up. It means trading anxiety for peace, performance for presence. It means you stop exhausting yourself trying to control every outcome and start trusting the wisdom of a God who sees the whole picture. It's an act of psychological and spiritual maturity, because immature faith demands answers, mature faith rests in relationship. Now, that doesn't mean we don't plan or prepare. Surrender doesn't mean irresponsibility. It means placing your plans under divine authority. It means you still move, but you move in humility. You speak, but you also listen. You act, but you stay open to correction. That's a very different posture than the one most of us operate in daily. So here's the irony. The very thing we fear, that letting go will make us vulnerable, is actually the thing that makes us safe. When you surrender your timeline, your relationships, your career, your identity, you don't become weaker, you become aligned. And when your life is aligned with God, it becomes a vessel for blessing. Peace flows. Wisdom flows. Doors open that you couldn't force. Timing begins to make sense. You stop striving and you start receiving. That's the spiritual principle and the psychological truth. You were never designed to carry everything. You were designed to yield to the one who can. So the question becomes personal. What are you still trying to control that God is asking you to surrender? Because until you let go, you'll never discover just how deeply He's prepared to bless what you place in His hands. There's a sobering truth many people overlook. Even those who claim to follow God, the enemy doesn't waste his energy attacking what's already surrendered. He focuses on what you're still holding back. Whatever part of your life you haven't submitted to God, that's where the warfare is the fiercest. That's where confusion festers. That's where temptation creeps in. And until you recognize this, you'll keep fighting battles in the dark, unaware that your vulnerability isn't random. It's rooted in resistance. This isn't mystical. It's practical. Think of it psychologically. Any part of your life that remains unexamined or unaligned becomes a blind spot. And blind spots, by definition, are areas where deception thrives. If you haven't invited God into your relationships, then fear, manipulation, or codependency can take root. If you haven't surrendered your finances, then anxiety and scarcity will govern your decisions. If you haven't submitted your identity, your self-concept, your image, then insecurity and pride will quietly sabotage your peace. You can claim to follow God with your mouth, but the enemy watches where your habits reveal a different allegiance. Now, let's talk about spiritual authority. You only have authority in the areas where you've submitted to God's authority. That's a law. When you're fully surrendered, you're covered. There's a kind of divine protection that rests on what you've yielded. But where you resist, where you insist on doing it your way, you step out from under that covering. Not because God is punishing you, but because you've disconnected from the source. It's like removing the umbrella in a storm and then blaming the rain. This is why morning prayer matters so deeply. It's not just a ritual, it's a recalibration of authority. Every time you begin your day by saying, God, I give this day to you, my thoughts, my emotions, my work, my decisions, you're reinforcing a boundary. You're drawing a spiritual line in the sand. You're saying, enemy, this ground is not yours. You are reclaiming territory in your mind, in your habits, in your atmosphere. And over time, that consistent surrender builds strength. Because here's the deeper truth: the areas we protect most fiercely from God are often the ones most influenced by fear. We don't submit them because we don't trust what He'll do with them. We think, if I give this up, I'll lose control, I'll miss out, I'll suffer. But that fear is the very foothold the enemy uses to manipulate us. He weaponizes our unsurrendered spaces. Not always dramatically, often subtly. Just enough to keep us anxious, insecure, reactive, distracted. Just enough to keep us from real freedom. So what's the solution? Not striving harder. Not pretending those areas don't exist. The answer is full, intentional surrender. And it begins with honesty. You have to be willing to say, God, here's the part I've been keeping to myself. Here's the relationship I haven't given to you. Here's the ambition I'm afraid to let go of. Here's the addiction I've been hiding. That act, brutal honesty before God, is the beginning of liberation. The darkness loses its power when the light comes in. And the light only comes in where the door has been opened. Once you've opened that door, God begins to establish His order. You stop living from a fragmented soul. You become whole again, unified in purpose, aligned in identity, and most importantly, protected. Not immune from hardship, but shielded from destruction. Because when your life is under God's rule, no weapon formed against you can prosper. So ask yourself with humility and courage, what part of my life am I still keeping for myself? Because the area you refuse to surrender will eventually be the area where the enemy takes ground. But the moment you place it in God's hands, that ground becomes holy. There's this quiet misconception that creeps into the mind, especially among those who are trying to live a godly life. The idea that putting God first means giving things up. That obedience will cost you more than it will bless you. That somehow surrendering to God is noble but not practical. But that's not the truth, not even close. The reality is, when God is truly first, blessings don't have to be chased. They begin to find you. There's a psychological principle here. When your values are aligned, when what you say matters most actually is what you prioritize, your life starts to flow with greater coherence. There's less inner conflict. You begin to move with clarity. People often think blessings are random, or that they're rewards for performance. But more often, blessings are simply the natural byproduct of living in harmony with God's design. When your heart, mind, and behavior are aligned with what is true, with what is eternal, then you begin to function as you were created to. And just like anything in nature, when something operates according to its design, it thrives. Putting God first doesn't mean your life will be free from difficulty. That's not the promise. But it does mean you'll be walking in a kind of divine rhythm. You'll stop chasing things that don't matter. You'll stop grasping for validation, for applause, for approval, because you'll already have it from the only source that matters. And in that place of centeredness, you'll start to notice something strange. Doors begin to open, peace begins to settle, resources begin to appear, not all at once, not always in the way you expected. But they come, and they come without the usual anxiety, without manipulation, without compromise. One of the most profound shifts that happens when you put God first is internal. You stop trying to force blessing, and you start becoming the kind of person who can hold it. There's a difference. Many people pray for favor but aren't emotionally, spiritually, or psychologically prepared to carry it. They still have character gaps. Still rooted in pride or fear. Still trying to control outcomes. But God, in His wisdom, often waits to release blessing until the vessel is ready. And when you truly prioritize Him, when you seek His presence, His will, His timing above your own, He starts shaping you into a vessel that can be trusted. You'll also notice that your definition of blessing begins to mature. It's no longer just about material success or smooth circumstances. Blessing becomes peace in the middle of chaos. It becomes wisdom in the face of decisions. It becomes a kind of gravity. People are drawn to your presence not because you're impressive, but because you're stable. And that kind of stability, rooted in God, is rare, it's magnetic, and it opens doors that effort alone never could. This kind of life is what Jesus meant when He said, "Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." He wasn't saying don't work or don't plan. He was saying, get your ordering right. Stop obsessing over the outcome and start cultivating the foundation. The rest will come, not without work, but without striving. Without selling your soul in the process. So the real question is this: have you been chasing blessings you were meant to attract? Have you been exhausting yourself trying to earn something that was always meant to follow obedience? Because the moment you stop trying to be your own provider, your own protector, your own source, and you put God at the center, your life doesn't just become blessed, it becomes anchored. And here's the truth worth carrying with you. When God is truly first, blessings don't have to be chased. They begin to chase you.